Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between, if you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, welcome to the 68th episode of GBR, the show that offers you a unique and often enlightening view of the guitar world that you won't get anywhere else. Which is kind of like saying we're the only one of its kind. Easy to say, difficult to do, but we do it each week, come hell or high water. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the origins of the hell and high water concept, I thought I'd take just a few moments to fill you in on what I learned in my journey to uncover the mysterious and, sordid past of hell and high water. So here's what the almighty Wikipedia gives us. And there's 8 or 10 items here, but first and foremost, it's a 1933 film called Hell and High Water. And this is described as an American pre-code drama film. And I was kind of curious about that, didn't know quite what that referred to. So I looked it up, and pre-code Hollywood refers to that brief area in the American film industry between the widespread adoption of sound and pictures in 1929 and the enforcement of the Motion Picture Production Code censorship guidelines. Well, that's a mouthful. And this was popularly known as the Hays Code in 1934. Some of you may remember that. I don't. Then there was the Hell and High Water film of 1954, which starred Richard Widmark. Now, some of you will remember Richard Widmark. I always thought of him as somebody who sounded a lot like Frank Sinatra, but didn't look anything like him. I was, of course, like nearly a baby. So then there was Hell and High Water, a 2006 book about global warming by Joseph J. Romm with 2 M's. Joseph J. Romm. Have no idea who that is. Maybe he's famous. I don't know. There was another book called Hell and High Water, Climate Change, Hope, and the Human Condition. This was in 2008 about global warming by Alistair McIntosh. There's kind of a British air to that, but who knows. Then there was a song called Hell and High Water by T. Graham Brown. Name sounds familiar, but there's no date. Don't know anything more than that. But there was a 2006 version of the song Hell and High Water by Blackstone Cherry. Some of you may remember them. But yet there was a third song, Hell and High Water. This was by the Allman Brothers Band from their album Reach for the Sky. Now, for those of you thinking that maybe there was a legal component here, well, you're so right. There's a hell or high water clause. And this is a clause in a contract that provides that the payments must continue irrespective of any difficulties which the paying party may encounter. Boy, that's tough. And my favorite, of course, is from season 2 of the American television series ER. And this episode was called Hell and High Water. And this is where Doug accepts an offer to work in a private pediatric practice. And after his last ER shift, he's on his way to a fundraiser when he gets a flat tire. So that's that. If any of you are unclear on this origin thing, I hope that that serves to clear it up. Now, today, we're bringing you yet another installment of our highly successful, fabulous, amazing intros series as we look back at episodes 21 through 31. Now, I know some of you may be asking, why is it 31 and not 30? Isn't it supposed to be 21 through 30? And the answer is yes, it normally would be, but it isn't. And I'll explain more in detail when I get to episode 22. But first, I think it's vitally important that we do something completely different. Okay, so this is volume 3 in our series called Fabulous Amazing Intros. Now, you may remember that way back in volume 1, I was thinking that if we were going to try to compete effectively against MyPillow and providing you with the best night's sleep of your life, we were going to need a jingle. So I offered the challenge to our listeners to come up with an ID jingle for GBR, and we'd have a little competition and play them on the air and generally have some fun with it. Of course, as you might expect, we got no response. Oh well. But then in volume 2 the following week, thinking there may have been some confusion over what exactly this series was all about, well, I issued a second challenge for you to send us your best collection of original musical intros, and we'd have a little competition and play them on the air and generally have a little fun with it. You may also remember that in both cases, I had to caution everyone that by sending us your jingle or collection of intros, you'd be giving us the right to use them, and we were not promising you anything in return. And just to be clear about it, right to use, nothing in return. Now, as you can imagine, we got absolutely no submissions whatsoever. So, after lengthy and heated debate, we've determined that no challenges or competitions would be offered further in this series. So that will be then, but more importantly, this will be now. So welcome to Fabulous Amazing Intros, Volume 3. Well, as part of our early and continued effort to bring CEOs on the show, I connected up with David Kalt, founder and CEO of Reverb.com, in episode 21. And in doing my homework for the interview, I discovered a few things about Reverb.com that seemed pretty interesting to me, but also did not appear to be getting much promotion or visibility. And as a result, we talked about a number of those things, and David was really quite eager to embellish on them. At one point, he acknowledged that he'd never been asked some of those questions. That made me pretty happy because, well, that's why we're here. And here's the intro. David Kalt is the founder and CEO of Reverb.com, the online marketplace for buying and selling new, used, and vintage music gear. The site currently has over 250,000 sellers, 10 million monthly visitors. The marketplace is comprised of buyers and sellers from beginner musicians, brick and mortar shops, and boutique builders to collectors, large retailers, popular manufacturers, and even rock stars. And believe me, there's much more, and we'll hear all about it as David Kalt joins us right here and right now. As you can imagine, every interview is totally unique, and this one was no exception. This was and still is the only interview I've done on GBR where the director of marketing, who set up the interview, insisted on being on the Skype call with us. I'm not sure what the point was, and it didn't make any difference, but, we have our own way of doing things here, and that typically isn't one of them. But as always, you can find out more about Reverb.com at Reverb.com. Now, I mentioned episode 22 in the front of the show, and I'm pretty much going to pass it by. It's titled 3 Different Views of Summer NAMM 2018, and I invited 3 previous guests back on to talk about the Nashville show, and they were Howard Paul of Benedetto Guitars, Jamie Gale of the Boutique Guitar Showcase, and John Moody of GHS Strings. If you're interested, take a listen to it. That being said, I'm moving right along to episode 23, where we featured the popular guitarist, Chris Standring. He's a pretty personable guy. In fact, he's a very personable guy and quite funny, so the interview was indeed fun to do. It's interesting because Chris is very hands-on with running his own business, and that includes a variety of components, so there's really a lot to learn there, and this is the intro. Well, I've been listening to Chris Standring's work for many years now. He's a terrific guitarist in the contemporary urban jazz format. He's released 12 albums over the last 20 years. And in fact, he's getting ready to start a 20th anniversary tour. His latest album, Sunlight, has some very creative and compelling music on it. I like it a lot. But Chris is also an entrepreneur, and he's built a career and a business that has served him well. And he's going to tell us all about that as Chris Standring joins us right here and right now. Well, since we did that interview last year, I see that Chris continues to stay quite busy as I'm on his mailing list, and I see that he's just about to release a new album next month called The Best of Chris Standring Remixed. I know he's been working on it for quite a while. I've listened to a couple of the early cuts, good stuff. But if you'd like to learn more about his work or schedule, etc., check him out at chrisstandring.com. Well, Carl Verheyen is very well known to many of us here in Southern California and LA, and he's been working here a really long time. I mean, really working a lot. The guy has always been busy as a session player or with Supertramp for decades and his own bands as well. I mean, he's a great player. He's a great performer, very sharp businessman, which we talk a lot about. And it's a very interesting and informative interview, and this is how I introduced him. Well, Carl Verheyen has been working in the business as a guitar player for something close to 4 decades now. In addition to working on hundreds and probably thousands of TV shows, movies, and recording sessions, he's been a member of the great band Supertramp for over 30 years. On top of all that, he's a critically acclaimed musician, vocalist, songwriter, arranger, producer, and educator with 14 albums and 2 live DVDs released worldwide. He's going to talk to us about the business side of all this and much more as Carl Verheyen joins us right here and right now. Well, I learned that Carl has played the guitar every day since 1965. Obviously, he was quite young when he started. If you've not listened to this show, I encourage you to do so. You can find out much more about Carl at carlverheyen.com. Well, I'm sure that many, if not most of you, have heard of the company called All Parts. And believe me, the name really says it all. One of the top suppliers of guitar-related parts and components of all kinds. There's quite an interesting story behind the development and growth of the company that's based in Houston, Texas. And after quite a bit of back and forth, I finally, with thankfully the nudge of guitar builder Michael Stevens, convinced its founder and CEO, Steve Wark, to come on the show for an in-depth interview. Now, the fact is, Steve doesn't do interviews, and this was certainly a rare occurrence, but it turned out to be a great opportunity for him to share a lot of details about All Parts that most of us would have never known. Here's the intro. Well, Steve Wark is the founder and president of All Parts, certainly one of the largest, if not the largest distributor of guitar, bass, and amplifier parts, with over 7,000 different products on hand in their warehouse in Houston, Texas, where they've been operating for the past 36 years. It took us a while to get this exclusive interview to happen, but it did, and we're going to hear the whole story as Steve Wark joins us right here and right now. So if you're into guitars or other similar instruments, if you've tinkered with them all the way to building them, maybe you've even bought something or many things from All Parts over time, I think you'll really enjoy this interview, and you can get more info about them at allparts.com. Now, I know that Richard Smith is a common name, to say the least, and there's more than one guitar player named Richard Smith. But I doubt there's another Professor Richard Smith in our circle. This is a great interview in episode 26 with the past chairman of the studio jazz guitar department at the famed Thornton School of Music at USC in LA. And for many, many years, he's been working with a lot of students who've gone on to great careers in their own right. Plus, he's a terrific musician who's had a recording and touring career that's taken him all around the world. Here's my intro for the professor. Well, Professor Richard Smith became the chair of the Department of Studio and Jazz Guitar at the renowned Thornton School of Music at USC at the age of 28. And after serving in that role for nearly 16 years, He's continued there as a full professor for the last 10 years, all the while working as a busy recording and touring artist with 13 solo recordings and a huge array of projects and accolades too numerous to mention here. But we'll let him talk about all that as Richard Smith joins us right here and right now. Later in the year on episode 46, which was our special holiday show, and Richard came back to talk with us along with a whole bunch of other previous guests and share his holiday message with all of us. If you'd like to find out more, you can check him out at richardsmithguitar.com. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of LSL Instruments. They make terrific guitars out in the San Fernando Valley area of LA, maybe a little further out, but generally in that area. Some of you may also own one, like Carl Verheyen. But the talent behind these instruments is Lance Lerman. You can guess how the name came about, but what's more interesting is how the business came about, as Lance traveled a very winding road to get there. And his story in episode 27 is quite engaging. And here's the intro. So Lance Lerman is the founder and president of LSL Instruments here in the LA area. Actually way out in the valley, as it is famously known, but nonetheless in the thick of the LA music scene, if you will. And that's been a benefit for his 10-year-old guitar design and manufacturing business. And their solid reputation among name players has not hurt either. But there's a fascinating story about how all this happened, almost by accident. And we'll hear all about that and more as Lance Lerman joins us right here and right now. Now, a while back, before I was doing GBR several years ago, I had the opportunity to go out and meet Lance at the LSL facility out there in the valley, about a 75-mile drive from me. And that was quite interesting. I don't get a chance to do that all that often, so it's a treat to see how folks operate and run their business. And you can see more of LSL Instruments at lslinstruments.com or on their Facebook page at LSL Instruments. I don't think I can say LSL Instruments anymore. Well, I've been a huge fan of Nathan East for a long time. I've watched him play many times for many years with Eric Clapton, and as an original member of Foreplay, so having the opportunity to interview him was amazing. But I have to tell you, it just barely happened. This was in the days when the show came out on Mondays. Why, I have no idea, but we had to get it up by Sunday nights. And I had the interview with Nathan for episode 28 scheduled for the Saturday before, but he was driving back to LA from Northern California, so long story short, we didn't get to it until like 10 p.m. that Saturday night. But he was so gracious about it because that's what kind of guy he is. As many will agree, he's a wonderful human being. And here's how I introduced Nathan East. Well, if you've been listening to music during the last 30 plus years or more, the chances that you've not heard Nathan East on bass are quite slim. He's enjoyed an extraordinary career recording and touring with some of the best-known artists in the business, like Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, Kenny Loggins, and so many more. I don't have time or room to mention them. Of course, he's a founding member of the jazz group Foreplay, and his record and performance appearances number in the thousands. There's so much to tell. It's better that we just bring him on so he can tell us about all that himself, as Nathan East joins us right here and right now. If you've not listened to this episode, I highly recommend it. I've heard from Nathan on several occasions since that show, and he was another one who came back to join us for our holiday show in episode 46. He's all over the place, but you can get more information at nathaneast.com. Now, if you're a fan of smooth jazz, then the name Peter White is probably of the household variety. He's pretty much been a fixture in that genre since the early to mid-90s. His unique sound and musical talent have kept him in the spotlight with many albums and tours to his credit. And this interview from episode 29 was one that, well, I was after for a long time and really enjoyed it. Here's the Peter White intro. Well, Peter White has enjoyed a long career that has included nearly 20 years as an integral part of British singer-songwriter Al Stewart's band. His own solo recording and touring career began in the early to mid-90s and has expanded steadily to the point where I would say he's a household name in the smooth jazz world. Along the way, he's collaborated with some of the best musicians on the planet, and all of that continues today. And there's much more to talk about, so let's do just that as Peter White joins us right here and right now. This was a very high-quality interview, much like that of Nathan East. Both of these guys are big into recording gear and all that, so they were both able to set up their connection to us really as good as it gets, and you can hear the difference. So if you're a fan of Peter White or smooth jazz or just guitar, you'll enjoy this interview. You can also take a look at his website for current appearances at peterwhite.com. Now, I've known of Sheldon Dingwall's work as an innovative bass builder for a long time, but I never knew much about the backstory, and it turned out to be absolutely fascinating. It's a story with a lot of inspiration that I think can be heard by anyone who listens to episode 30. And here's the intro. Well, Sheldon Dingwall has been building innovative bass guitars with passion and dedication for nearly 3 decades in Saskatoon. That's about 1,700 miles northeast from us, up in the middle of Canada. Today, his company occupies a 6,000 square foot facility that produces nothing but high-quality fan-fret multi-scale basses, as they have since the beginning. But the story of how he got where he is today is not a straight line, and there were a few significant bumps along the way. But we'll hear about that and much more as Sheldon Dingwall joins us right here and right now. Now, I have to say, Sheldon Dingwall is way up there in Canada, way up there. I mean, with me down here in Southern California, it seems like he's at the North Pole, but in actuality, it isn't. But he builds some beautiful instruments, and if you'd like to see for yourself, visit dingwallguitars.com. Now, in episode 31, I had the opportunity to interview Beth Marlis, who's been with Musicians Institute in Hollywood for over 3 decades. She's been an integral part of MI in different roles, but she's also an amazing guitar player and a Benedetto artist. In fact, it was Howard Paul, our friend and CEO at Benedetto Guitars, that connected us up with Beth. And here's how I introduced her. Well, Beth Marlis has been part of Musicians Institute in Hollywood for over 31 years. She started as a guitar student, became an instructor, rose to head of the guitar program, and then assumed her current position of vice president. While she has also run the Musicians Foundation for nearly a decade, was a board member, and ultimately chair of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, she still finds time to teach a few hours a week at MI. Like I said earlier, she's a very busy person, and there's much more to talk about as Beth Marlis joins us right here and right now. Beth was another one I had the pleasure of meeting in person at Winter NAMM this year, and she has herself referred several people onto the show, including guitarist Jennifer Batten. So we're very grateful for that, and you can see more about Musicians Institute at mi.edu. So what did you think of this week's episode? We always want to hear from you, and you can do that easily through the official episode page on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com or on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business. Or you can email us directly if you like, contact@guitarbusinessradio.com. And of course, if none of that's working for you, just call us on our GBR hotline at 888-777-2404. You can do that right now if you like, or later. Operators are currently trying to hack into our massive computers, unsuccessfully, I might add, but if you call right now, they might avoid being arrested. So once again, we presented you with some of what amounts to promotional or preview clips, about 10 of our previous episodes. And because of the Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, we had a little different schedule, and we're able to bring you another one of these shows. You know, I always think, like a lot of you, I'm sure that Memorial Day here is kind of the start of summer, which, well, kind of ends with Labor Day in September. We never know quite what the weather will be like from summer to summer here, but it usually seems to start out with something we've always called June gloom. And that means a lot of overcast weather, which often clears to sunshine later in the afternoon, only to roll back in off the ocean the next morning. We've actually been having that weather now for about a month or so. Usually by July, it's gone, giving way to warmer and ultimately hot weather for a few months. But this year, I got to thinking about the gloom part of it and how the weather can seem to have an effect on how we see things. It's a totally different feel, and I know there's a lot written about it. In fact, some of you may be aware of something called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. Not sure which came first, the name or the acronym, but it's appropriate. Now, I got to know about SAD during my years in medical media in the 90s, and in fact, I had a good friend in Maryland, still do, I presume, who built a business around treating the disorder with these special light boxes that they manufactured. They sold a lot of them in Seattle and other places where there isn't a lot of sunshine, especially during the winter. But it's a real thing, and they've pretty well proven that some people are deeply affected by gloomy weather, and in many cases, it's the light of the sunshine, I guess, that helps, and thus the light boxes to simulate sunshine. You can look it up, but it seems that about 5% of the population may suffer from some degree of SAD. And in those cases, there are clinical aspects that don't affect the rest of us, but that doesn't mean we don't see or feel things differently depending on the weather. Now, you may be wondering, what does that have to do with the business of guitar or anything else? And my best answer is, I'm not really sure, except that it's helpful to understand what colors our view of life. And that applies to everything we do or experience. And knowing what may be causing us to feel off in one direction or another, that gives us an opportunity to stop and think and respond more thoughtfully, especially when other people are involved. And that makes for better business, not to mention a better life. So I have nothing else to say except, well, yep, you guessed it. Stay positive, stay focused on your destination. But so important, keep all those options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week on episode 69. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.